It was a busy afternoon at a high-end clothing store, the kind of place where first impressions seem to matter most. A well-dressed black man walked in, casually browsing the racks of designer suits and accessories. But as he moved through the store, whispers began to spread among the employees. They exchanged suspicious glances, their unease growing with every step he took. One employee, unable to hold back any longer, approached him with a sharp tone, questioning his intentions. Little did they know, the man they were accusing wasn't just another customer. In fact, he held a title that would leave them absolutely speechless. What happens next is a story of assumptions, accountability, and a twist that flips the script in the most unexpected way. Stick around to see how this moment unfolded and the powerful lesson it left behind for everyone involved. This introduction sets a compelling tone, but here's a slightly refined version to enhance clarity and engagement. It was a busy afternoon at a high-end clothing store, the kind where appearances often speak louder than words. A sharply dressed black man strolled in, browsing the racks of designer suits and accessories with a calm, confident demeanor. But as he moved through the aisles, the staff exchanged uneasy glances, their whispers growing louder with each passing moment. Suspicion clouded the air, and finally, one employee stepped forward, confronting him with a sharp tone, demanding to know what he was up to. What they didn't realize was that their assumptions were about to backfire spectacularly. This man wasn't just another customer. He held a title that would completely shift their perspective. What happened next left the employees speechless and delivered a powerful lesson about prejudice, perception, and humility. Stay tuned to see how this unforgettable moment unfolded. The employee's voice carried through the store, drawing the attention of other staff and even a few shoppers. The man, caught off guard by the sudden confrontation, calmly turned to face his accuser. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice steady but his expression unreadable. The employee, emboldened by the murmurs of her co-workers, pressed further, asking if he intended to pay for anything or if he was just looking around. Her words were sharp, dripping with an accusation she didn't even try to hide. Other employees stood frozen, some exchanging awkward glances, while others avoided looking at the scene entirely. One young clerk, who had only been working there a few months, hesitated. Something about the man's demeanor didn't match the suspicion swirling around him. Still, she stayed silent, unsure of how to intervene without drawing attention to herself. Meanwhile, the man's calm exterior masked a storm of emotions. He scanned the room, noticing every uncomfortable fidget and every judgmental glance. But instead of reacting with anger, he took a deep breath and asked a question that silenced the room. "What makes you think I don't belong here?" The tension in the store was almost tangible, and a few customers shuffled awkwardly away from the growing scene. The employee who had confronted him hesitated, her confidence wavering for the first time. "It's company policy to keep an eye on suspicious activity," she said, stumbling over her words. The man nodded slowly, as if considering her response. "Suspicious," he repeated, his tone calm but pointed. "Interesting. Tell me, do you ask every customer these questions, or just the ones who look like me?" Before anyone could protest, she raised the object high above her head and brought it down against the pedestal with all her strength. The impact sent a shockwave through the cavern, and the object shattered into blinding shards of light. A deafening roar erupted from the creature, not of anger, but of something that almost sounded like relief. The cavern collapsed into chaos. The walls began to crack and crumble, the ground splitting beneath their feet. The creature let out one final bone-chilling cry before its massive form dissolved into the same brilliant light, scattering like embers caught in the wind. The air grew still for a moment, and then everything went dark. When Jenna opened her eyes, she was lying on the forest floor. The night sky stretched above her, stars twinkling faintly through the canopy of trees. She sat up, her head spinning, and saw the others stirring nearby. They were back in the forest, the cabin nowhere in sight. It was as if it had never existed. "Is everyone okay?" she asked, her voice hoarse. One by one, they nodded, shaken but alive. The forest was eerily silent, no sign of the creature or the glowing crystals. "What just happened?" Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jenna didn't answer. Instead, she looked down at her hand. A faint, glowing mark had appeared on her palm, the same shape as the object she had destroyed. It pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat, before fading away. They stood together in the clearing, unsure of what to say. The terror they had faced felt distant now, like a fading nightmare. But as they began to walk, leaving the forest behind, Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The forest felt different. Lighter, perhaps, or maybe waiting. As they stepped out of the trees and into the open, Jenna glanced back one last time. In the distance, just for a moment, she thought she saw those glowing eyes watching them. But when she blinked, they were gone. She turned away, her heart heavy with the unshakable feeling that their story wasn't over. "It's here," he whispered. Without thinking, they bolted, feet crashing against the uneven ground, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Branches clawed at their arms and faces, but they didn't dare slow down. The growling turned into a guttural roar, closer than before, sending shockwaves through their chests. Jenna stumbled, letting out a small cry as she hit the ground. Alex skidded to a stop, his instincts warring with his fear. "Get up," he hissed, pulling her to her feet, but the delay had cost them precious seconds. Behind them, a shadow loomed, massive and unnatural. They couldn't see its full form, only flashes of something too big to be real, gleaming eyes that pierced the darkness, jagged shapes that moved like they didn't belong. It didn't charge, it stalked, savoring the chase. The group reached a clearing, panting and disoriented. In the middle stood an old, abandoned cabin. Its windows were shattered, and the door hung crooked on its hinges, but it was their only chance. Without a word, they dashed inside, slamming the door behind them. The wood groaned under the impact and silence followed, so thick it felt suffocating. Jenna leaned against the wall, clutching her side. "What asterisk is asterisk that thing?" she managed to say between breaths. No one answered, no one knew. Outside, the growling stopped. The forest fell eerily silent, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Alex peered through a crack in the door, but all he could see was darkness. Then came the sound. A slow, deliberate scraping, like claws dragging against the cabin's wooden exterior. It circled them, methodical and unhurried, as though it had all the time in the world. "We're trapped," Ryan said, his voice barely audible. Jenna grabbed his arm. "No, there has to be a way out. Look for another door, a window, anything." They scattered, searching the cabin's interior. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and decay. Every creak of the floorboards felt deafening, every movement a risk. The scraping stopped. Silence. And then, with a deafening crash, the door burst inward. This section sets up maximum tension, with events leading to a climactic moment. Let me know how you'd like to proceed. The door slammed against the wall with a force that shook the entire cabin. Splinters flew through the air, and a cold, unnatural wind rushed in, extinguishing the lantern in an instant. Darkness swallowed them whole. "Run!" Jenna screamed, grabbing Alex's arm and pulling him toward the back of the cabin. Ryan and Mia followed, their movements frantic and clumsy. The creature didn't enter immediately. Instead, it stood in the doorway, its hulking shadow blocking out what little moonlight seeped through the broken windows. Its heavy, guttural breathing filled the silence, a sound so deep it felt like it was vibrating in their chests. Jenna's hand landed on something, a trapdoor half hidden beneath a tattered rug. "Here," she hissed, frantically pulling at it. Alex dropped to his knees to help, yanking it open to reveal a narrow set of stairs descending into complete darkness. Without hesitation, they clambered down, one after the other, the wood creaking beneath their weight. Mia was the last to slip through just as the creature lunged. Its claws raked the air where she had been seconds before, and its roar of frustration reverberated through the cabin, making dust rain down from the ceiling above. They landed in what looked like a cellar, the damp air thick with the smell of mildew. Jenna fumbled for her flashlight and flicked it on, the weak beams slicing through the darkness. Crates and barrels lined the walls, some collapsed and spilling their contents onto the dirt floor. The sound of the creature above was deafening. It was pacing, its heavy footsteps shaking the boards, its growls low and menacing. "This can't be the only way," Ryan whispered, his voice trembling. "There has to be another exit." "What is that?" Alex asked, stepping closer despite the dread pooling in his stomach. Jenna shook her head, her pulse racing. "I don't know, but it's something. Maybe it leads outside." Mia hesitated, or maybe it's worse than what's up there. Above them, the creature let out a roar that rattled the very foundation of the cabin. Dust rained down again, and the sound of claws tearing into wood made it clear the trapdoor wouldn't hold for long. They didn't have time to debate. Ryan stepped forward, placing his hand on the strange markings. The moment his fingers touched the surface, the room seemed to shift. The air grew colder, heavier, and a faint hum began to fill the space. The door frame started to glow brighter, the red light pulsing like a heartbeat. "This doesn't feel right," Mia said, backing away. But the trapdoor above them splintered, and a deep growl echoed through the cellar. Jenna grabbed Ryan's arm. "We don't have a choice." With a reluctant nod, Ryan pushed harder against the markings. The wall shuddered and began to open, revealing a narrow tunnel that sloped downward into more darkness. The glow from the doorway illuminated just enough for them to see that it stretched far beyond the cabin's foundation. Without waiting, Jenna led the way, her flashlight shaking in her trembling hand. One by one, they filed through, the sound of the creature tearing through the trapdoor spurring them forward. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, the glow behind them dimmed, and the hum grew louder, almost disorienting. But then, as they turned a corner, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern. Strange, luminescent crystals lined the walls, casting an otherworldly light over the space. In the center of the cavern stood an ancient stone pedestal, and on it something shimmered. A small, intricately carved object that seemed to hum in sync with the air around them. "What is this place?" Alex whispered, his voice awed but filled with unease. Jenna approached the pedestal cautiously, her flashlight now unnecessary in the glowing cavern. The object seemed to pulse with energy, and as she reached out to touch it, Ryan grabbed her wrist. "Don't," he said, his voice sharp. "We don't know what it is." But before she could respond, a deafening roar echoed from the tunnel behind them. The creature was coming. Its massive frame was silhouetted in the tunnel's entrance, its glowing eyes fixed on them. And then the hum from the pedestal grew louder, resonating through the cavern. The ground beneath their feet began to shake. Jenna's hand hovered over the object, torn between fear and instinct. Whatever this thing was, it was connected to the creature, and to whatever force had trapped them here. Taking it could mean salvation, or something far worse. The creature's guttural roar filled the cavern, shaking the walls and scattering loose shards of glowing crystal to the ground. It was massive, its claws scraping against the stone as it stepped closer, its glowing eyes locked onto the group. The hum from the pedestal grew deafening, vibrating through their bones. Jenna's hand still hovered over the strange object, trembling with indecision. "Do it," Alex shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. "It's the only way." Jenna's fingers closed around the object, and a surge of energy shot through her arm like a lightning bolt. The cavern erupted with light, brighter than anything they had ever seen. Jenna staggered back, gasping as the object began to pulse in her grip, its hum matching the frantic beating of her heart. The creature halted mid-step, its head tilting as if confused, then let out an air-spitting roar and charged. Before it could reach them, the light from the object expanded, forming a barrier between the group and the creature. The creature collided with it, recoiling as if burned. The barrier shimmered like liquid, crackling with energy, but it wasn't holding. The creature clawed at it relentlessly, its snarls growing more desperate as the barrier began to flicker. "This isn't enough," Jenna cried, her voice shaking. She felt the object in her hand grow hotter, its energy surging through her like it was alive, demanding something from her. Her vision blurred, and for a moment she saw flashes, images of the forest, the cabin, and the creature itself, as if the object was showing her its story. "This thing, it's not just protecting us," she gasped. "It's connected to that asterisk." She pointed at the creature, her realization hitting her like a thunderbolt. "It's keeping it here. It's trapped, just like us." "What are you saying?" Alex shouted, panic rising in his voice. Jenna turned to face the group, her eyes wide with understanding. "If I destroy this, it might release us, but it'll release it too." Ryan shook his head. "There has to be another way." Her face turned red, and she struggled to respond. The room seemed to shrink as the weight of his words hung in the air. At that moment, the store manager appeared, clearly sensing the rising tension. "Is there an issue here?" he asked, trying to defuse the situation without understanding what had just unfolded. The man turned to him, his calm expression now edged with something sharper. "Yes," he said, "and I think you should hear about it. But first, let's talk in your office." Everyone in the store watched, holding their breath, as the man and the manager walked toward the back. The employees left behind whispered among themselves, some starting to piece together that this might not be just any customer. The younger clerk, still quiet, began to feel a knot of guilt forming in her chest. Behind the closed office door, the conversation would change everything, and the truth about who this man really was would leave the entire store stunned. Sure, here's a continuation of a story crafted to build suspense and maintain engagement while adhering to the specified guidelines. The wind howled through the dense forest as shadows lengthened, swallowing the last remnants of daylight. The group huddled together, their breath visible in the icy air. A flickering lantern cast jagged patterns against the towering trees, making them seem alive, watching. Every crunch of a twig or distant rustle of leaves made them flinch, their nerves stretched taut. Jenna's voice, barely above a whisper, broke the silence. "We need to keep moving. If we stay here, we're sitting ducks." Her words hung in the air, heavy with urgency. No one disagreed, but their legs felt like lead, every step forward a battle against both exhaustion and fear. From somewhere deeper in the forest, a faint but chilling sound carried through the night. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't an animal. It was something else, something that made every hair on their bodies stand on end. "Did you hear that?" Alex asked, his voice cracking. He gripped the flashlight so tightly his knuckles turned white. No one answered, but the look in their eyes said everything. They had all heard it, and they all knew it was closer now. The trail they'd been following for hours seemed to twist and vanish under their feet, as if the forest itself wanted them lost. The map Jenna held trembled in her hands, and the markings they had been relying on now looked meaningless. "Wait," Ryan said suddenly, his voice sharp. He stopped dead in his tracks, tilting his head. The others froze too, their hearts pounding in unison. A low growl echoed from somewhere behind them. Slow, deliberate.